People, what's a secret you're holding onto that you've been wanting to share anonymously? Me and my cousin's wife used to be bang buddies. 2 years ago, I met a girl on Tinder, and we quickly slipped into a very casual relationship. It wasn't anything serious, and we both made it clear from the start that we weren't looking for anything long-term. The chemistry between us was undeniable, and the physical intimacy was incredible. We explored a lot of new things together that made everything even more exciting. Our time together was lighthearted and carefree, and we both had a blast with no pressure or expectations. After a few months, she moved away for work, and naturally, we drifted apart. We knew it wouldn't last, but I couldn't help but remember the fun times we had. Fast forward 2 years, and I attended my cousin's engagement party. I was catching up with my family, enjoying the celebrations, when suddenly, I saw her. It took me a second to process, but I realized it was her. Turns out, she had moved to the same city as my cousin, and the two of them had dated, got engaged, and eventually married. It was such a strange coincidence, and we were both completely shocked to see each other there. We exchanged surprised looks, but quickly covered up our reactions. We acted like we'd never met before, slipping into the roles of strangers without skipping a beat. I remember the awkwardness of it all, but we both agreed that it was better for everyone if we kept our past a secret. We swore to each other that we would never bring it up to my cousin. Looking back, it was one of those moments where everything felt surreal, but we managed to play it off like it never happened. It felt like a secret we were both carrying, but neither of us ever mentioned it again. Story 2. A few years ago, I was at my boyfriend's house helping fix a lag issue on his parents' computer. His dad was the pastor of their church, so we spent a lot of time around the family, and I was always happy to help with tech stuff when they needed it. One afternoon, his parents asked me to check out their computer because it was running slow, and as I worked to track down the problem, I discovered they had downloaded some malware. As I dug deeper into the issue, I decided to check the browser history to see where it might have come from. That's when I saw something disturbing. Among the usual websites, there were tons of pages about using vegetables in very unconventional ways. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and I couldn't shake the thought as I kept browsing. It was like something I never expected to find, especially on a pastor's family computer. It was all about vegetables being used to. I couldn't understand why they would have visited these sites, and I was definitely caught off guard. The next day, my boyfriend and I were helping them with their backyard garden, where they had rows of carrots, cucumbers, and other produce. As we worked, I couldn't help but look at the garden a little differently. My boyfriend kept asking me why I was so quiet and distant, but I didn't have the heart to tell him the real reason. I didn't want to make things awkward or say anything that might upset him, but it was hard not to think about the weird discovery I had made. I never told him what I found on that computer. I didn't think it was my place to bring it up, and honestly, I wasn't sure how to even approach it without making things super uncomfortable. Every time I looked at the garden, I couldn't help but wonder what was really going on behind the scenes. It was one of those things that stuck with me, but I kept it to myself, knowing it would just make everything strange if I spoke up. Story 3. For a while, I worked in healthcare recruiting, helping to match nurses and nurse practitioners with positions based on their specialized experience. Occasionally, we'd have nurses or NPs come into the office for more in-depth interviews if we needed to clarify details about their expertise in areas like pediatrics, oncology, or other specialized fields. It was a normal part of the job, but one particular interview stands out to this day. One afternoon, I scheduled an interview with an NP who specialized in urology. Let's call her Sarah. The setup at our office included separate interview rooms with blinds on the windows and doors that were locked for privacy. It was designed to make these interviews professional and confidential, but in this instance, it turned into something entirely different. As the interview began, Sarah seemed friendly and confident, but soon she started dropping subtle hints that caught me off guard. At first, it was light comments, compliments, and playful teasing that I brushed off as nothing more than charm. But then she made a bold remark about how, if I ever needed my reproductive system checked, she'd be happy to help. It was one of those moments where you can't quite believe what you're hearing, but the tension in the room had undeniably shifted. From there, things escalated quickly. What started as a professional conversation took a sharp turn into something far more personal and intimate. The chemistry between us was undeniable, and before I knew it, we were locked in a passionate encounter right there in the interview room. The blinds were drawn, the door was locked, and we banged. When it was over, we both straightened ourselves up, exchanged knowing smiles, and went our separate ways like nothing had happened. No one in the office ever found out, and we never spoke of it again. It was one of the most surreal and unexpected moments of my career, a mix of adrenaline, attraction, and spontaneity that I'll never forget. Looking back, It feels almost like a scene from a movie, but at the time, it was as real as it gets. It's not something I'd ever recommend or plan for, but it happened, and it's definitely one of the more memorable stories from my time in that job. Story 4. I moved back in with my parents during the COVID-19 pandemic. Financially, I'm in a good spot, and I have the means to move out whenever I want. But my parents don't seem to mind that I'm staying here to save up money. They're not too concerned, so it's not like there's any pressure on me to leave anytime soon. The main reason I haven't taken the step to move out yet, though, is a bit more complicated. For over 2 years now, I've been casually hooking up with a woman in the neighborhood. She's a bit older than me, but we've developed a pretty fun and satisfying arrangement. Our encounters are nothing short of exciting, and it's been an awesome connection. She knows what she wants, and it's made everything feel comfortable and easy. It's one of those situations where things just seem to flow naturally, no strings attached. Funny thing is, it all started with my dog. From the very first day we crossed paths while walking around the neighborhood, my dog insisted on getting some pets from her. He's always had a thing for people who give him attention, but this time, it was clear she was more than willing to oblige. That simple exchange of affection led to us talking more, which eventually turned into something more playful. I have to give my dog credit for being the reason we first connected. If it weren't for him, who knows how long it might have taken for us to cross paths and actually talk. So, shout out to my dog for making that initial connection possible. Story 5. I'm a straight guy who used to livestream on campsites, performing live in front of dozens of strangers. Surprisingly, the vast majority of my audience, probably around 95%, were men. Back then, I hadn't been with anyone romantically, and my self-confidence, especially regarding my body image, was pretty low. The experience of receiving thoughtful compliments from viewers, seeing familiar faces returning to my streams, and even getting offers for payment was incredibly validating. It gave me a sense of worth and appreciation that I hadn't felt before, and it significantly boosted my confidence over time. If I were still single, I'd honestly be doing this kind of thing regularly. In fact, I might even take it more seriously and try to turn it into a legitimate source of income, given how much value and positivity I got from it. Story 6. I once took a 2-hour online test for college, and we were required to stay on camera for the entire duration until everyone had finished. About 30 minutes into the test, I realized I had accidentally messed myself up, thanks to my severe lactose intolerance. The milk-based creamer I accidentally added to my coffee set off a chain reaction I definitely wasn't prepared for. The worst part was that I couldn't move or leave the camera frame because if I did, everyone would see what had happened. So, I had to sit there in my own mess for the rest of the test, hoping no one would notice. I waited until the test was finally over and everyone had finished, and I was able to turn off the camera and escape. To my surprise, I still managed to score 100% on the test. Afterward, the cleanup was a nightmare. I had to throw out my office chair and take a long shower to clean up. My stomach is incredibly sensitive, and though this wasn't the first time something like this has happened, it was by far one of the most embarrassing. There's an even worse story involving a Bible study at church, but that's a whole other tale for another time. At least I found some comfort knowing I'm not the only one who's experienced something like this. I heard a similar story on a talk show, and I'm curious to find it so I can laugh about it. On a positive note, I was studying psychology at the time, and now I work in that field, so at least it led to something good. Story 7. In high school, I was part of a singing and dancing group that traveled frequently to perform across our country and even in neighboring ones. We're from Europe. One time, we stayed at a Catholic school dormitory that was part of a larger monastery. On weekends, when the students went home, they rented out the dorm rooms to travelers, and since we were a big group, we rented out the entire place. Our group was mostly high school and college students, so naturally, things got a little wild. Some people brought alcohol and weed, and there was a lot of partying in various rooms around the dorm. The room assigned to me happened to be directly across from the head priest, who oversaw the school and dormitory. That night, I ended up getting a bit drunk with a girl from our group, and we ended up sneaking into my room together. Things escalated, and we ended up hooking up, twice, over the course of the night. Neither of us got much sleep, and in the early morning, I carefully snuck her back to her side of the dorm, since the boys and girls areas were strictly separated. The wildest part? The next morning, the priest gathered our group and actually commended us, calling us one of the quieter and more well-behaved groups he'd hosted. I have no idea how he didn't hear anything, given how close his room was, but we managed to avoid suspicion entirely. It was one of those moments that felt like a mix of relief and disbelief. Story 8. I've only cheated once in my life, and it was during one of the darkest periods of my relationship with my now ex. I was financially dependent on him and couldn't afford to leave yet, but for over a year, he had been actively and maliciously making my life miserable. One night, an old partner of mine was passing through town, and I made up an excuse to see him. That night was nothing short of electric. I lost count of how many protections we used or how many times he made me euphoric. We spent hours together, taking breaks only to rehydrate, and I felt more desired in those few hours than I had in the previous 4 years of my relationship. He made me feel like I was the center of the universe, like if he didn't have me, the world might fall apart. When I got home, the only thing my ex noticed was the bruises, and I brushed it off as an accident from a pool party. He didn't ask how my night went or even if I'd had a good time. Instead, he launched into a complaint about his day at work. Not a single question about me or my evening. I had expected cheating to make me feel guilty, like I'd be instantly branded as a terrible person or overwhelmed with regret. But none of that happened. I don't regret a single moment of that night. For the first time in ages, I spent an evening with someone who genuinely wanted me. He wanted to hear what I had to say, to be in my presence, to see me bare, to make me feel things I hadn't felt in years. I'd been with someone who stopped touching me as soon as we moved in together, and the idea of feeling sexy had become a distant memory. I'm no longer with my ex, though I still have to see him occasionally. Every time I think back on that night, it's my little secret, one that still sends a shiver down my spine and reminds me of what it feels like to be truly desired. Story 9. When I was 19 back in 2004, I created a dating profile and mentioned that I was into older women. I've always been the quiet, nerdy type, so I didn't really expect much to come of it. For months, nothing happened. No messages, no interest, just silence. Then, out of the blue, I got a message. It turned out it was from a woman whose daughters had set up a dating profile for her. At the time, I was too naive to worry about scams or whether the situation seemed strange. Luckily, it wasn't anything sketchy. We started talking, and eventually, we met in person. Despite the significant age gap, me being 19 and her 47, we really hit it off. To my surprise, we had a lot in common, and our connection felt natural. Over time, we developed a wonderful relationship. We dated for a few years, and it was honestly one of the most meaningful relationships I've had. However, as time went on, some people in her family started to express concerns about the age difference. Eventually, the pressure got to her, and she decided to break things off. Even though it ended, I'll always look back on that time fondly. It was an unconventional start, but it was genuine, and it taught me a lot about relationships and myself. Story 10. My brother was murdered in July 2020, and I've been hiding the fact that I've become a functioning alcoholic because of it. I lie to my parents, my wife, and my friends and coworkers, downplaying how much I drink. I tell them, I only have 3 drinks on Saturdays since it's my only day off. But they don't know the full story. They don't know about the 3 drinks I have before going out, the shots I take before clocking in at work, or the cocktail I mix at home to have with my lunch. Since I work night shifts, my wife doesn't see me when I come home, crash for hours, and then force myself to sober up before she gets off work. I've always enjoyed drinking, even before my brother passed away, but now it feels like I can't go without it. Drinking keeps my mind foggy enough to dull the pain, to help me get through work, and to maintain relationships I almost threw away when he passed away. I know what I'm doing is wrong, but I feel trapped. As the oldest sibling, I always encourage my younger brothers to take risks and live their lives freely, reassuring them they could always call me if they were in trouble. The day he passed away, he called me, but I was asleep and didn't answer. I haven't been able to sleep without drinking since that day because the nightmares come when I'm sober. I've never told anyone about that missed call, and I don't plan to. It's a weight I carry alone. Story 11. My ex-girlfriend was the one who first introduced me to the world of swinging. She introduced me to a group of neighborhood wives who were part of a close-knit community with shared interests. At the time, I thought it was her way of adding some excitement to our relationship or maybe just exploring something new together. It felt like an unexpected, but thrilling adventure, and I went along with it, trusting her intentions. Not long after I became part of this new scene, she broke up with me. At first, I was confused and hurt, wondering what had gone wrong. When I asked her why she ended things, she explained something that left me completely stunned. She admitted she had wanted to break up with me for a while, but was worried about how it might affect my self-confidence. According to her, introducing me to swinging and this group of women was her way of helping me build up confidence with other people. She thought that if I could see myself as desirable and capable of connecting with others, it would make her departure easier for both of us. Looking back, it was a lot to process. On one hand, I appreciated that she didn't want to hurt me, and in her own way, she tried to soften the blow. On the other hand, it was strange knowing that her intentions weren't entirely rooted in mutual exploration, but were part of a bigger plan to prepare me for life without her. In the end, it was a bittersweet experience. I gained a lot of confidence and learned more about myself, but I also felt a mix of gratitude and frustration over how it all unfolded. It's one of those memories that left me with a lot to reflect on, especially about relationships, communication, and how people handle difficult emotions. Story 12. I had been hanging out with a friend all day, someone I was absolutely infatuated with at the time. We'd gone to a concert together, and I was on cloud nine just being around her. But as the night went on, she decided to leave me to go to another party. I was left standing alone on the street, feeling miserable and not quite ready to head home. As I stood there, trying to figure out what to do next, a man pulled up in his car and asked for directions. He wasn't very clear about where he was trying to go, and after some back and forth, he finally admitted he was looking for a nearby club. His honesty intrigued me, and I started asking him questions about it, more out of curiosity than anything else. The conversation took an unexpectedly flirtatious turn. I'm a gay woman, so I wasn't attracted to him, but there was something oddly thrilling about it all. Before I knew it, he started performing solo sitting in the driver's seat. Strangely, I didn't feel uncomfortable. In fact, I stayed calm and even encouraged him a little, purely out of fascination with how surreal the situation was. At one point, I reached through the window and held his free hand while he continued. When he was done, we exchanged this oddly meaningful hand squeeze, almost like a quiet acknowledgement of how bizarre and harmless the moment had been. Then, he said something polite, adjusted himself, and drove off to continue his search for the club. I was still feeling down about my friend and the unrequited feelings I had for her, but in a strange way, the encounter left me feeling better. It was such a random, intimate, and harmless experience, something so far removed from the sadness I'd been feeling. And knowing it was a story she'd never know about added an extra layer of satisfaction, like a small, private rebellion against the emotions she stirred in me. Story 13. My husband and I are what most people would call your typical boring married couple. We've been together for 21 years, have 3 kids, and both work in a factory. On the surface, we probably seem pretty ordinary. We used to be Mormon, and that background often makes people assume I'm super innocent or prudish, especially since I haven't tried much in the way of drugs or alcohol. At work, my coworkers sometimes make comments that reflect this assumption. They'll say things like, "Oh, don't let my sweet little friend hear this," as if I'm some delicate flower. What they don't know is that my life has a lot more layers than they'd ever guess. For example, my husband and I have been to a few swinger events. We've only ever played with each other at these events, but doing so in front of an audience has been its own kind of thrill. I've also posted unclothed pictures of myself online. Nothing with my face, of course, but it's definitely out there. And, at one point, I had a much younger girlfriend who I met up with at a hotel a couple of times. There are moments when my coworkers make their little comments, and I want to spill it all just to shatter their assumptions. But I hold back, because I know how people can be. If I shared these details, I'm pretty sure my male coworkers would start thinking I'm open to cheating or making moves on them, while the women might start assuming I'm out to steal their husbands. It's not worth the drama or the misunderstandings. So instead, I just smile and play along with their version of me, the innocent ex-Mormon who probably blushes at the mention of a curse word. Meanwhile, I keep the real story to myself. It's funny though, knowing just how far off their perceptions are. In a way, it feels like I have this secret double life that no one would ever expect, and honestly, I kind of like it that way. Story 14. Over 20 years ago, a friend and I used to go out together, just looking for some fun and casual connections. One night, we met 2 guys who had hotel rooms at a nearby place. The vibe was right, so we decided to join them. What followed was one of the most memorable nights of my life. The guy I was with wasn't just good in bed, he was hilarious. We spent as much time laughing as we did hooking up. At one point, we even broke the bed. Without missing a beat, we moved to the floor, then the chair, and just kept going. The whole night was filled with laughter, fun, and a few too many drinks. It was loud, chaotic, and absolutely unforgettable. Sadly, the guys were only in town for the weekend, and they lived too far away for anything long-term. In the morning, we shared a kiss, laughed about the wild night we'd had, and decided not to exchange numbers. It was one of those moments where we both knew it was perfect as a one-time thing. When my friend and I met up in the hallway the next morning, we were a sight. Hair sticking up in all directions, grins plastered across our faces. We didn't even need words. We just high-fived each other and laughed. It was the kind of night you don't forget. Fast forward a few months. My friend and I ended up in another city and met a group of guys while we were out. We were chatting and having a good time when one of them suddenly got this wide-eyed, starstruck look and blurted out, "Wait, are you from this town? Are your names?" My friend and I laughed, playing coy, and asked, "Why do you want to know?" That's when the whole group of guys dropped to their knees, bowing dramatically and yelling, "We're not worthy. We're not worthy." They were laughing so hard, and we were completely baffled. After we got them to calm down, they explained the story. Turns out, they worked at the same place as the two guys we'd hooked up with months earlier. But here's the kicker. Their boss had been in the hotel room right between hours that night. He didn't get a wink of sleep because of all the noise, and he was furious. The two guys ended up getting fired over the incident, but apparently, they told everyone that the night had been absolutely legendary and totally worth it. That earned us instant legend status with this group of guys. We partied with them all night, laughing and joking about the whole situation. For the record, there were no hookups this time. It was just pure fun. To this day, my friend and I have never told anyone else about how we accidentally got two Bush pilots fired. Every now and then, we'll giggle about it when we reminisce, but it's our little secret, and one heck of a story. Story 15. One particularly rough morning, nursing a wicked hangover, I decided the best remedy would be to hit the water and do some fishing. I launched the boat, cracked open a couple of beers, and let the gentle waves soothe my pounding head. But as the beers settled, a deep rumble began stirring in my colon, a clear signal that it was time to find a bathroom, fast. Firing up the old Vinrud motor, I pointed the boat toward the marina, hoping to make it in time. About halfway there, the situation turned critical. I realized I had two options, either ruin my pants or improvise. Choosing dignity, or so I thought, I decided to relieve myself off the side of the boat. In one surprisingly smooth and well-practiced motion, I threw the motor into neutral, stood up, rotated 90 degrees, dropped my pants, and hung my rear over the edge of the boat. Bracing myself, I gave a solid push, ready to let nature take its course. But instead of the expected result, all that came out was a loud, unapologetic fart, a real thunderclap. Relieved in more ways than one, I pulled my pants back up, shrugged off the false alarm, and prepared to head back to my fishing spot. As I turned the boat around, something caught my eye, two older men fishing on the shore about 50 feet away. They were staring directly at me, their faces frozen in a mixture of confusion and horror. That's when it hit me. From their perspective, they just witnessed a wild man speed up on a tiny aluminum boat, drop his pants, deliver an earth-shaking fart in their direction, and then casually drive off as if nothing had happened. To this day, I can't help but laugh when I think about those poor guys. Did they think they were the targets of some bizarre farting vendetta? Or did they just chalk it up to the mysteries of the fishing world? I'll never know, but one thing's for sure. It's a story I'll be laughing about for years. Story 16. I'm in a tough spot with my marriage. I still deeply love my wife, but I'm unhappy in our relationship. If we met today, I don't think we'd even date, much less get married, because we're just so different now. Still, the thought of leaving her for my own happiness makes me feel physically ill. She constantly tells me how happy I make her, how much she loves me, and that she couldn't live without me. And I love her too, but it's complicated. We got married young because we believed it was what God wanted. Even though more experienced adults advised us to wait, we were sure we knew better, with the encouragement of our pastor. We went through extensive premarital counseling, so the foundation of our marriage is solid. But over the years, we've grown apart in almost every way. We've diverged on political views, personal values, hobbies, religious beliefs, a change I haven't shared with her, and even something as small as movie preferences. There's so little common ground left between us. The few things we still enjoy together are watching anime and listening to audiobooks, though it's usually one she chooses, as my recommendations haven't worked for her. Intimacy is another issue. We haven't been intimate in months, and she recently discovered she's aromantic. She's fine with the idea of essentially never having physical relation again. I, on the other hand, am not fine with that. It's hard to reconcile these differences. Financially, we're struggling, partly because she isn't working right now. Despite that, I try to make sure she has money to spend on herself, especially for her hobbies, because they genuinely help with her depression and give her a sense of accomplishment. I work over 50 hours a week, yet I also handle the majority of the cooking and cleaning because her mental health makes those tasks difficult for her. I know she appreciates what I do. It's not malicious on her part, but I often feel like I'm putting in much more effort than she is. At the same time, I also recognize that I enable this dynamic, which adds to my frustration. She recently started seeing a therapist, which is a step in the right direction, but with our finances stretched thin, I can't afford therapy for myself or couples counseling. I know we need to talk about these things, but I don't know where to begin without making her feel like I'm attacking her. I care for her deeply and want to be with her, but I'm just not happy. It feels like I'm stuck in a cycle where I'm giving everything I have, and while she's grateful, I don't feel fulfilled. I don't want to lose her, but I don't know how to fix what's broken either. Story 17. In my circle of friends, which mostly consists of couples in long-term relationships, I'm the only single guy. To be honest, I don't think I've been in a committed relationship for more than 2 weeks. The whole idea of being in a couple has always seemed exhausting to me, and I've never really felt the pressure to rush into it. It wasn't until one night while we were playing beer pong that I realized how lonely I've actually been. I was on the same team as one of the ladies, who was a little tipsy, and after we won the game, she gave me a hug. At that moment, it hit me that ever since I left home for college, I hadn't experienced those simple physical gestures, like a hug, that used to bring me comfort when I was younger. In the end, all I really want is to be hugged. Story 18. About 10 years ago, I suffered a concussion that caused me to lose almost all of my episodic memory. Over the past decade, I've regained some of it, remembering people I used to know, facts about them, and how I felt about them. But the memory of specific events is still mostly gone, or I only get brief flashes. It's a source of embarrassment for me because, before the injury, I had a photographic memory. Now, I can barely remember anything. I don't tell people about it because I don't want them to feel sorry for me. Honestly, I feel a bit weird even admitting it here. I also don't want people to get angry. There was one time when I was standing at a bus stop, and a guy came up to me, greeted me by name, and asked how I had been, saying it had been so long since we last saw each other. The problem was, I had no idea who he was. When I explained that I had a concussion and had lost much of my memory, he got upset and accused me of lying, saying I just didn't want to talk to him. He stormed off, and that experience has stuck with me. I don't want to go through something like that again. Story 19. I have a condition I was born with called Klinefelter syndrome, which means I have an extra X chromosome. Growing up, I always wondered why my body seemed different in certain ways, particularly in how I developed down there. As a result of this condition, I had to take testosterone injections during my childhood because my body doesn't produce much of it naturally. I didn't go through puberty until I was in 10th grade, and when I did, I had a significant growth spurt. Now, at 25, I'm 6 feet 5 inches with wider hips for a man, and I still have difficulty growing facial hair, usually only getting a few patches on my chin. At one point, I struggled with self-doubt because I wondered who could love me with these differences, but I've worked through that, and now I embrace my unique traits. Everyone has something about themselves that they feel insecure about, and I've come to understand that perfection is an illusion. I no longer feel ashamed of something that's just part of who I am. I'm sharing my story to give insight into my personal experience that most people don't know about. Story 20. One night while I was out on my delivery route, I had an unexpected restroom accident, #1. It came on so suddenly that I didn't even have time to pull over or find a discreet spot. Before I could react, about 20% of it happened right there in the driver's seat. Thankfully, I managed to grab a container for the rest. Since we were allowed to take our vehicles home after work, and I only had 14 packages left to deliver, I decided to drive home, thoroughly clean the affected area, and deliver the remaining packages first thing the next morning. No one else uses my vehicle, and all the packages were in the back, so there was no risk of contamination. Still, I was pretty upset with myself. At least it wasn't a public incident. Unlike the time in 2007 when I threw up out the door while driving someone on my bus. Story 21. My husband and I share what I consider to be the most loving, stable, and healthy relationship I've ever witnessed or dreamed of. We've been together for over a decade, and our relationship began with a deep and genuine friendship. Sure, we've had disagreements and serious conversations about important topics, but arguing or fighting isn't our style. Our relationship is full of I love yous, thank yous, daily cuddles, and complete honesty without fear of judgment or insecurity. We share everything with each other. Friends who have observed us over the years often say we have their ideal relationship, their goal partnership. What they don't know is that we're about to open our marriage. From the start, we've been somewhat monogamish, with a higher threshold for what we consider cheating than many people. We've never believed that being attracted to or loving one person diminishes your love or attraction for another. While some of our close friends are in successful polyamorous relationships, most are monogamous, and we haven't shared this decision widely yet. We're still figuring things out, and while I'd love to talk about it openly, I know some friends might not understand why we take this step when our relationship is already so strong. Earlier this year, I met someone who caught my attention. A few months ago, I confessed to my husband, "I think I have a crush on our mutual new friend." His response was a supportive, "What are you going to do about it?" For someone with a historically low libido, I've experienced an unexpected surge in my drive. It's like I've woken up. After months of discussions, we decided to explore opening our marriage. Surprisingly, instead of creating distance, these deep conversations about our hopes, fears, and insecurities have brought us closer. Our intimacy has flourished, and we've been having some of the best, most connected experiences of our lives. It feels paradoxical, but by preparing for occasional separations, we've unlocked a new level of closeness. With my husband's full blessing, I approached my crush at the beginning of the month. He admitted he likes me too. However, he wanted to speak with my husband face-to-face before moving forward. Last week, the three of us spent a day together and had an open, honest conversation. My crush revealed he has experience with polyamorous relationships and is comfortable with the arrangement. My husband, meanwhile, is genuinely excited for me to have this experience. The day ended with a group hug, and we've all agreed to take things slowly. We decided I'll have one overnight stay with my crush, after which we'll pause, reflect, and reassess how everyone feels. My first date with my crush is tonight, and I'm beyond excited. He's absolutely stunning, like a Greek statue brought to life. Wish us all luck. Story 22. Not me, but my sister told me it. At 19, she once had a nightmare that mom had passed away. One of those really sucky nightmares where nothing outlandish can tip you off to its falsehood. So, when she woke up, she ran down the hallway in a delirious fit of fright and burst into our parents' room. A bit of context before I continue. Both parents had thought the other had locked their door, and they had coincidentally also woken up early, but under much more positive circumstances. She didn't walk in on them in the act, but they were both in bed, wearing nothing. She said she was so happy mom was alive. It didn't immediately register what she was seeing, how dark it was that early also helped, and went right to expressing her relief until our very alive mother gave her a very loud, "Get the hell out of here." So, my sister got the best news in perhaps the worst way. Mom was not only still alive, but she was also very much still in love with Dad. Story 23. I'm burning out as my wife's caretaker. I love her deeply. We've been together for 21 years, but I'm exhausted. Still, no matter how drained I feel, I'll always be here for her, every single day, no matter what. That being said, sometimes I find myself wondering what if. Specifically, what if I had spoken up back in high school and told my best friend that I had feelings for her? I found out years later that she had feelings for me too, and I can't help but wonder how different my life might have been if I hadn't been too scared to say something. But honestly, I'm happy with where I am now. My wife and I have built a life together, raising 3 amazing kids, and I've spent half my life with her by my side. Still, every now and then, the thought crosses my mind. What might have happened if I'd been braver back in 1996? Story 24. I feel completely trapped in a marriage I no longer want to be in, and I don't know how to find a way out. We were high school sweethearts, and it felt like the natural thing to do when we started a family young. I devoted myself completely to my kids, putting my dreams and goals on hold to focus on them as a stay-at-home mom. At the time, it felt like the right choice. I wanted to give them the best life possible. But now, the kids are older and in school, and the house is so quiet during the day that it feels suffocating. I wake up every morning feeling useless and unsure of who I even am anymore. My entire identity has been wrapped up in being a wife and mother, and now that the kids are more independent, I realize I don't know what's left of me. The thought of stepping out into the world to find a job or rebuild my life terrifies me. I've been out of the workforce for so long that I feel unqualified to do anything. Plus, I'm battling a depression so deep that it makes just getting out of bed feel like a monumental task. Even if I found the courage to look for a job, I'm faced with so many practical challenges, financial struggles, living in a rural area, and not having my own car. It all feels like an impossible mountain to climb, and I don't even know where to start. On top of that, I feel so much guilt and shame. I look back at the choices I made and wonder how I let myself get here. I should have done more to maintain my independence or to prepare for a life beyond being a mom. But instead, I poured everything I had into my family and ignored my own needs. Now I feel like I've failed, not just myself, but my family too. I'm stuck in this limbo, feeling like I've royally messed up my life, and I have no idea how to fix it. I want more for myself, but I'm scared of the unknown. I'm scared of letting everyone down. And most of all, I'm scared of staying like this forever, with no way out and no sense of purpose. It's a painful, lonely place to be, and I don't know how much longer I can endure it. Story 25. Even though my mother loves and adores me, I can't say I feel the same way about her. I don't feel any real affection for her, and it's something I've struggled with for a long time. She had me when she was 16, an unplanned pregnancy. My father, who embodies every negative trait you can think of, abandoned her the night I was born to go on a date with his girlfriend. Desperate for help, she turned to anyone she could find in the family and eventually ended up with my paternal grandparents. They agreed to adopt and raise me, but only on the condition that she cleaned up her life, finished school, and matured enough to take care of me properly. The last time I willingly spent time with her was about 10 years ago, during summer break in high school. By then, she'd cleaned up her act in some ways, but she still has a toxic, abrasive personality that comes out when she feels comfortable. She moves constantly, which adds to her instability. Despite all of this, she's still very loving in her own way. Every few months, she messages me on Facebook, asking how I'm doing, if I think about her every day, and when I'll visit her. Right now, she's only a state away, about a 4-hour drive. I respond kindly and tell her I miss her, but it's not the truth. I do it because I don't want her to feel alone. The reality is that she only raised me during my first year of life. My grandparents took over after that. My father, unsurprisingly, caused a massive rift in the family years ago and disappeared. I don't even know where he is now. As much as I want to care about her, I just don't feel any emotional connection to her. It makes me deeply uncomfortable when she acts sweet and close, as though we share a bond one don't feel exists. In a few years, I'm planning to move to Japan to start a new life. Part of the reason is my love for the country, but another big reason is to leave behind some of the stress and fear I felt living in the US. I want to break away from the parts of my past that weigh me down. However, I can't bring myself to tell her how I really feel or cut ties completely. Both sides of my family have histories of mental illness, and I don't want to risk her spiraling because of something I say or do. So, I stay in this awkward limbo, pretending to care for her sake while feeling nothing on my end. It's exhausting and complicated, but for now, it's the only way I know how to handle it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.